The first time Jonah Mercer lied to the Territory, he did it with a sharpened pencil and a widow standing in the rain outside his office door. By the time the ink dried on the vellum, he had hidden enough gold to start a war and saved enough lives to forfeit his own. The widow's name was Ruth Calder. Water shone on her blue coat. Mud darkened her hem. She laid a folded notice on Jonah's drafting table with the care people use around the dead. "They say the north pasture has to be resurveyed," she said. "Men from Gideon Voss's company are already on my fence line. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. These stories travel farther than stagecoaches ever did, and we like knowing whose lamp is burning with ours." Jonah looked at the notice, then at the number written in Ezra Pike's thin hand. Section 12. North Fork Bench. Mineral irregularity suspected. He pulled 3 plats from the shelf behind him. The newest survey, an old military road map, and beneath both a fading copy of a Spanish grant with the creek line drawn in ink gone bruise-colored with age. Outside, wagon wheels hissed through rain. Inside, the room smelled of wet wool, lamp smoke, and cedar shavings. Jonah bent low over the sheets and followed the creek with one finger. Then he stopped. The creek had not moved. The map had. Only a 1/4 inch on paper. 30 yards in the world. Enough to drag Ruth Calder's pasture and 3 neighboring homesteads across a strip of black sand wash that any honest surveyor with mining camp experience would have recognized for what it suggested. Jonah had that experience. He knew the shape of greed, even when it arrived as a neat line in brown ink. "How bad is it?" Ruth asked. "If Pike's men set these lines at dawn," Jonah said, "Voss can condemn half your valley before supper." "For cattle." He looked at her. "For what lies under the grass." She did not gasp. Women who have buried husbands do not waste breath on surprise. "Gold." "Voss believes so. That's enough to ruin you whether he's right or wrong." Ruth let out one slow breath. "My husband always said men with maps could steal more land than men with rifles." He wasn't wrong. The easy thing was to stamp the notice, lock the office, and keep the careful, empty life Jonah had built out of guilt. Instead, he pulled a fresh vellum sheet toward him. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. "Buying time." He copied the official plat, then shifted the meander back to where the creek had truly run before Pike's office nudged it. Not enough to shout fraud. Only enough to bury the black sand bench inside a wedge of scrub nobody would rush to seize without reopening every survey in the valley. It was a lie. It was also the first decent thing he had done in years. "Go home," he said. "Wake the Harpers, the Ortegas, Ben Weller, all of them. Bring every deed, tax receipt, ditch agreement, and probate scrap to the schoolhouse at first light. And tell them what?" Jonah stamped the false correction before courage could cool. "Tell them paper is about to matter more than blood." She did not move. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Mercer?" He thought of another map, another mining district, and his wife Ellen trampled in a gold rush that began with his honest survey and ended in 6 graves. He did not know how to give that grief to a stranger in one sentence. So he said, "Because Voss is never hungry for just 1 acre." Ruth studied him, then took the notice and went into the rain. When the door shut, Jonah slid the true overlays into the hollow underside of his instrument case beneath the brass transit. He sat alone with the storm and listened to the Territory continue on as if nothing had changed. By dawn, everything had. The schoolhouse filled with 6 families and the smell of damp coats, chalk dust, and coffee boiled too long. Ben Weller, the blacksmith, worried his suspenders with one thick thumb. Mrs. Ortega had brought her sleeping boy wrapped in a quilt. Amos Harper kept lifting and settling his hat like his hands needed something to blame. Suspicion met Jonah before gratitude did. "Government man in a hurry usually means trouble," Harper muttered. "You're not wrong," Jonah said. That oddly helped. He spread papers across the teacher's desk. "Voss wants the North Fork bench. If Pike voids your boundary lines, he takes the ditch, the pasture, and the rest of you one sale at a time. I can slow him. I can't stop him alone. Why not show us the real survey?" Ben Weller asked. "Because the truth would bring every hungry man within 50 miles before sundown. Because discovery was only a blessing to people strong enough to survive being first found by it. Because some truths need a door built around them before they're turned loose," Jonah said. Ruth looked at him, then with sharper attention. He set them to work. Mrs. Ortega sorted receipts by year. Harper fetched the probate order for his brother's strip. Ben wrote out and returned with an old granite marker chipped, but still bearing its crosscut. Ruth organized the piles with the quiet authority of a woman who had kept a household standing while grief sat at the table each night. By noon, they had built the beginnings of a defense from witness marks, tax ledgers, ditch logs, and signatures. It would have looked pitiful to any man who believed power only wore a gun. Just after noon, Gideon Voss came in. He did not remove his gloves. He was broad through the chest, silver at the temples, and so clean he looked imported. Two riders stood behind him on the porch with their hats low. "Mercer," Voss said pleasantly. "Interesting place for territorial business." Jonah kept his pen moving. "Interesting times." Voss smiled without warmth. "Including the part where you stamped a correction at midnight without witness or field review. That's energetic work." The room went still. Before Jonah could answer, Ruth stepped from the desk. "If you came to buy coffee, you're too late. If you came to buy land, you'll have to say it plain." Voss turned to her with a softness uglier than anger. "Mrs. Calder, sign a sale agreement today, and I can see that you and your neighbors are compensated generously. The territory has interests bigger than one widow's pasture." "My husband is buried on that land," Ruth said. "You'll forgive me if I don't price him by the acre." For an instant the polish slipped. Jonah saw the real Voss there, the one who hated being denied by anyone he considered smaller than himself. Then Voss looked back to Jonah. "You have until tomorrow's hearing to remember which side of the ledger feeds you. After that, I let the law do its work. And I wouldn't advise anyone here to ride alone tonight. Gold stories draw a rough company even when no one speaks them aloud." When he left, Mrs. Ortega crossed herself. Ben Weller spat into the stove and said, "Paper is only paper until a hungry man signs it. Then it bites deeper than barbed wire." By evening, rumor had already done its work. Men loitered by the livery. Two strangers asked at the mercantile if the Calders were selling stock. A prospector from the upper camps rode through town with a pan strapped to his saddle. Voss had loosed suspicion like a hound. Jonah spent the next hours checking boundary stones and bearing trees with Ruth at his side. Dusk found them by the ford where the creek ran high and brown from the rain. "You haven't told me all of it," she said. "No. Does this end with my neighbors saved and you in prison?" "Possibly." He cleaned mud from an old marker until its cross showed through. Ruth watched his hands. "Caleb died hauling, or for Voss," she said. "They called it a wagon accident. 3 days before, he told me he'd seen a map that made him wish he'd never learned his numbers. If anything happened, I was to keep his field notebook until someone honest asked for it." Jonah went still. "You have it, hidden at the line cabin above the south pasture, under a loose hearthstone." Hope moved through him sharp as cold river air. If Caleb copied what he saw, it could prove Pike altered the meander before the filing date. She studied his face. "Then why do you look afraid of being right?" "Because proof made justice possible and survival harder. Because Voss would kill for paper before he would kill for dirt." "Where's the key?" Jonah asked. She reached into her pocket and held up a small brass key on a frayed cord. "With me." The easy choice was to wait for daylight and pray Voss did the same. The right one was to ride now. "You'd go tonight," she said. "Wouldn't you?" Her mouth almost smiled. "That depends. Is this the part where a government man tells me to stay by the stove?" Jonah handed her the gelding's reins. "Mount up. If you were standing there with night gathering over the cottonwoods and half a valley's future hidden under one loose stone, what would you have done? Would you trust the man who had already admitted lying to save you, or let him ride into the dark alone?" They reached the line cabin as the first hard wind came off the ridge. The shack leaned under the weather like an old man. Ruth went in first with the lantern. Jonah followed with one hand near the revolver he disliked enough to oil only when rust shamed him. The cabin smelled of old ash and pine. Ruth lifted the third hearthstone and drew out a tobacco tin wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay a narrow notebook and a freight receipt from Voss Freight Milling, paid to Caleb Calder for line guidance and marker verification 3 days before his death. Jonah turned pages fast but careful. Distances, bearings, marker notes. Then one line pressed so hard it nearly cut the paper. Pike moved stake 14 after dusk. Voss present. Black sand and cut bank. God help us if Ruth stays. A board creaked outside. Jonah shut the notebook. Lantern down. Now. Darkness rushed in. Boots hit the porch. He slammed the first rider before the man could lift his pistol. They went down hard. The gun fired once into the night. Ruth came through the doorway, swinging the dead lantern. Glass burst against the rider's jaw. The second man rushed from the side of the cabin. No room for ornament then. Only motion. He lunged at Ruth. Jonah caught his coat, missed his arm, and the pistol flashed. Wood burst from the door frame inches from Ruth's shoulder. Jonah drove his forearm into the man's throat, and they crashed over the porch rail. Ruth kicked a knife into the mud. The first rider staggered up bleeding. "No!" Ruth shouted as the second man ran for the horses. Jonah saw what she didn't. A third silhouette near the trees, rifle rising. He caught Ruth around the waist and threw them both into the rain barrel as the shot cracked. Water exploded over them. The barrel split. Horses screamed. Jonah felt fire rake his upper arm. "Ridge," he gasped. "Move." They ran uphill through cedar and shale while shots snapped branches overhead. Ruth had the notebook inside her coat. Jonah had blood in his sleeve and the brass key in his fist. They did not stop until the cabin was a faint glow below them. Behind a basalt outcrop, Ruth ripped cloth and bound his arm. Her hands were steady. Her voice was not. "You could have let me take that shot." No. That wasn't a discussion. Still no. For one raw second, she sounded close to breaking. Caleb used to say decent men always apologize for the trouble of saving your life. Rain ran off Jonah's brow. I was never decent enough for Caleb's standards. She tied the knot hard. Maybe not. But you came anyway. They could not return to town. Voss would have men on the road. So they crossed the ridge to the abandoned church above Miller's Draw. In the sagging vestry, under a roof that leaked in 3 patient places, Ruth cleaned Jonah's wound by lantern light, and he finally told her the truth he had been carrying like iron. Years before, he had filed an honest survey in a mining district west of there. The map was printed. Prospectors swarmed. Fighting broke. In the rush, a sluice trampling killed 6 people, including his wife Ellen, who had only come to bring him coffee because he had missed supper again. "I found gold on paper once before," he said. "I watched what men did with it. Since then I've trusted lines more than people, and even that hasn't worked much." Wind worried the church bell above them. Ruth sat back on her heels, the bloody cloth in her hands. "After Caleb died," she said softly, "I learned grief doesn't only take the person. It takes the version of you that thought the world had limits. But there are still a few things it can't steal unless you hand them over." She touched the notebook between them. "One is the right to decide what your pain will make of you." It was the truest thing anyone had said to him in 7 years. He drew Ellen's old brass compass from his coat. The glass cracked, the needle still faithful to north. "I carry this to remember I was loved before I became difficult." Ruth held it carefully, then gave him Caleb's key. "And I kept this because I couldn't bear the sound of an empty hook by the door." Strange, isn't it? We spend years guarding objects when what we're really guarding is the part of us that still hopes the door might open the right way again. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. Stay with us here. A like and a subscribe tells us there is still room in the world for stories where quiet hearts are not overlooked. Jonah closed his hand over the key and compass together. If we win tomorrow, the valley gets the truth. If we lose, Voss gets it first. Either way, the gold won't stay hidden much longer. "Then we make sure the people above it own more than fear when it comes out," Ruth said. "How?" She looked toward the black window where dawn would come. "By giving the valley one thing Voss never believed poor people could manage. Each other." They woke the valley before sunrise. House to house, door to door, with Ruth speaking and Jonah standing where men could see the bandage and judge the night for themselves. They told the truth about Pike's altered line, the attack at the cabin, and the hearing set for 9. They did not tell the gold. Then Ruth asked each family one question. If the bench was challenged, would they stand separately and be bought one by one, or sign together and hold as one ditch, one pasture, one future until the law shook loose? Poor people understand leverage better than bankers think. By 8 o'clock, every family had signed the mutual hold-fast agreement Jonah drafted on school paper, witnessed by Father Tobin, Mrs. Ortega, and Ben Weller with his thumbprint dark as a coin. It did not look grand. It looked unstoppable. The courthouse filled before 9. Farmers and prospectors crowded the room and spilled onto the porch. Voss stood near the clerk's table, smooth as polished wood. Ezra Pike sat beside him with papers arranged in front of him like a fence made from authority. The sheriff stepped toward Jonah. "Jonah Mercer, you are charged with falsifying a territorial plat." A murmur ran through the room. Ruth did not flinch. "True enough," Jonah said before the sheriff could touch him. "And I'll explain why in a voice everybody here can hear." That was his hardest choice, made plain. He could still have hidden behind caution, tried private arguments, begged for time. Instead, he walked to the front and laid the true overlays: Caleb's notebook, the freight receipt, and the granite marker chip beside Pike's neat stack. Pike went pale first. Voss adjusted a cuff. "A confessed forger is a poor witness against respectable men." Jonah nodded. "On character, perhaps. On measurements, less so. Stones don't care who is respectable." He spoke as surveyors do when they want the world small enough to reason with. "Bearings, distances, original grant monuments, flood benches, the moved meander, Caleb's note about stake 14. Then he pointed through the courthouse window. "The original monument line runs from the church step to the hitching post by Ortega's store," he said. "Any man here can walk it. I suggest we all do." In less than a minute, the hearing spilled outside. Morning had cleared cold and bright. Mud shone in the ruts. Jonah took his survey chain, handed one end to Ben Weller, and kept the other. Together they stretched it from the church step, where Father Tobin pried up a cornerstone to show the buried iron pin beneath, straight across the square, through the edge of Voss's assay shed, into the hitching post where Ortega's eldest dug up the second marker exactly where Jonah said it would be. A sound moved through the crowd then, low and deep, the sound people make when a lie tears open at the seam. Jonah raised Pike's filed map. "This plat moved the line to fit a theft already planned. Leave the monuments where law says they stand, and Voss controls nothing he hasn't paid honest tax on." Pike began to bluster about clerical discretion and public necessity. Ruth stepped forward with Caleb's receipt and read aloud the notebook line, naming Pike and Voss at the moved stake. She did not perform it. She simply gave the truth its legs. The quiet after was more damaging than any shout. Voss dropped the gentleman's mask at last. "You think a room full of farmers can hold what sits under that wash?" he snapped. "The moment word spreads, they'll tear each other apart for it. I'm the only thing standing between this valley and chaos." Jonah looked at Ruth. Looked at Ben Weller with soot under his nails, Mrs. Ortega holding her sleeping boy, Harper standing shoulder to shoulder with neighbors he barely trusted last week. Then Jonah unfolded the mutual hold-fast agreement. "You were wrong about one thing," he said. Word already spread. They didn't tear each other apart. They signed together before breakfast. He handed the paper to the clerk. The signatures ran down the page like fence posts no storm could lift. That was how Jonah won. Not with the lie, though it bought the hours. Not with luck. He won because he had finally trusted people more than lines, and because Ruth had shown him how to turn trust into something a rich man could not buy apart. After that, the rest came fast. Father Tobin swore to the monument. Ben Weller swore to the dug stone. Ortega produced ditch records Pike had ignored. One of Voss's riders, smelling prison in the air, confessed the order to seize the notebook and frighten Ruth off her land. By noon, Pike wore irons. Voss was under guard for fraud, conspiracy, and suspicion in Caleb Calder's death, pending further inquiry. Jonah spent the afternoon finishing what Voss had begun badly, and Jonah meant to end properly. He filed the true survey with the corrected monuments. He filed the hold-fast agreement as a lawful common venture. And when the assay from the black sand wash confirmed fine placer gold exactly where the old map had whispered it would, the rights belonged not to Voss's syndicate, nor to the territory, nor to whichever brute arrived first with a shovel, but to the families whose land and labor sat over it together. Voss lost his freight contracts within the week. His banknote holders lined up at the doors before the month turned. Pike was removed from office and later convicted on charges broad enough to keep him aging behind stone. By winter, one hired hand admitted Caleb's wagon accident had been arranged to silence a man who noticed too much. Ruth heard that confession without looking away. The valley did not become rich all at once. They worked the wash carefully, in shares, under rules stricter than any mining company would have tolerated. The first money repaired ditches, paid debts, roofed the schoolhouse, and set a doctor on permanent retainer 2 towns over. The second season built a grain mill so no widow had to sell her winter wheat at insult rates again. By the third, people called the North Fork bench by a new name, Mercy Hold. Jonah stayed. At first he told himself it was to finish filings, then to supervise monument resets, then to train a deputy in case the Territory ever again confused surveying with theft. Ruth never argued with any excuse he used. She only left coffee on the porch rail when he worked too long, and, one early spring morning, hung Caleb's brass key beside Ellen's compass on a hook by her kitchen door. On the evening the charges in Caleb's death were made formal, Ruth walked to the small graveyard behind the cottonwoods with a jar of creek water and a clean rag in her hand. Jonah went with her, but stopped outside the gate until she nodded him in. Caleb's headstone was plain, husband and teamster, but someone had tucked wild asters at its base. Ruth knelt and cleaned the mud from the letters while dusk settled blue over the valley. I kept waiting for justice to sound like thunder, she said. Turns out it sounds more like a shovel biting dirt, and a clerk finally telling the truth. Jonah stood beside her with his hat in both hands. I don't know what a man says at another man's grave when he comes late to helping. Ruth touched the stone once, then looked up at him. You come honest. That's enough. Before they walked back, she set Caleb's old freight receipt on a flat rock, struck a match, and watched the paper curl black, then red, then nothing at all. The smoke lifted straight into the cooling air. Word of that little fire spread almost as fast as the gold. By week's end, people who had crossed streets to avoid Jonah were tipping their hats. Mrs. Ortega sent tamales to his porch. Ben Weller brought him a new survey mallet with the handle rubbed smooth. Harper, who trusted nobody without a long trial, said only, "Glad you lied when you did," which in that valley counted as affection. Months later, they held a supper behind the schoolhouse for the first season the valley had spent unafraid. Children ran between benches. Ben Weller argued about horseshoes nobody had asked about. Mrs. Ortega laughed so hard at something Father Tobin said that coffee came out her nose and dignity left her for a full, blessed minute. Ruth stood at the edge of the lantern light with flour on her sleeve and looked toward the rebuilt north pasture where the grass moved over hidden wealth as calmly as if men had never killed for less. Jonah came to stand beside her. Not too close at first, then close enough. Funny thing, he said. I spent half my life drawing lines to tell men what belonged to them. Turns out the best things never fit inside one. Ruth slipped her hand into his, weathered palm to weathered palm, as natural as creek water finding its old bed. Beyond them, under the first evening star, the valley shone with repaired roofs, steady fences, and one schoolhouse window glowing gold against the dark. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a remote cattle ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the half-blind rancher who saw her worth before anyone else did.